Okay, so we have a Revizto issue table that's come in, and if you haven't changed anything, it should actually fill out the template. But what I want to show you today is how to get to the same place from scratch. Couple notes about this template. Right now, I'm using a demo project from Revizto themselves. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff that's missing in categorization. There's a heck of a lot of statuses, and the number of people assigned is maybe not as realistic as a real project. So just so you know, your data is probably going to be looking more like this, right? So we see there's a lot more clash tests, a lot more rooms, a lot more levels, a lot more tags, and a lot more assigned departments. So it makes a lot more sense. And notice too, the priorities and the statuses, there's a lot less of them. So I can't change the demo project, and I can't really share a project that's been shared by some of our customers. So just know, as I work with this data, it's a little bit imperfect, but it should look a bit better for you since you'll be using a real project. Okay, so where do we start? I'm going to go to the beginning of my template here. Take the Explorer page. The Explorer is kind of, the starting point of any report, if you ask me. And notice too how it's got a great matrix in here. We could use this. In this case, we're going to delete pretty much everything. Let's just keep a tiny little version of our viewer down here. We'll change it as we go and move things around. So first thing we'll need to do is a matrix. That's kind of the core of Power BI, and it's one of my favorite tools. I'm going to click here on the matrix and place it in the viewer. And normally we would count elements, right? But in this case, we're going to be counting the issues. And we saw earlier in our data that every single issue has a unique issue ID. So when I select my matrix and I go into my visual, I'm going to drag the issue ID into my data. And that's going to be the core thing. So really, there's 264 issues. And if we look at what was present in our previous matrix, this is basically our shopping list. So these are the categories that we dragged from the Revizto issues and we put in our matrix. So let's start to do some of that. We have our assignee company, department, and full name. Now already you're seeing that what I was telling you about earlier, a lot of this data is empty. That's not going to be the same when you have a real project in here. So the next thing is going to be level, room, and status. And once again, we're going to see some of that being empty. So level, room, and status. Okay, now the thing you want to know about matrices is how to navigate them. It's called drilling up and down, and you really want to use a combination of these two buttons here. So notice when I drill up, it starts to summarize things. So there's 256 issues that are not assigned to anybody, and 8 of them that are assigned to Revizto folks, and specifically the customer success team, etc. And we can go down and we start to see more of a breakdown. So I'm going to keep doing the matrix just to see any kind of problem that could arrive. So we already have the status. Next is priority tags, date created, and title. Okay, let's dig in here. Now notice it's starting to do a really annoying breakdown with the date created. So if I click on the date created, the little arrow here, I'm going to get rid of this hierarchy and just say date created. And now it's actually showing me a date. If I want to go on here, date created, I can actually change the format. Notice how it opens the formatting tool whenever I click on it. So I could change this, to one of these, or just put in more M's for a longer month name, just like you would in Excel. Next, I'm going to copy the matrix just to kind of start showing more interesting data. There's not really interesting data in the assignee full name at the moment. A lot of the levels, I believe, are not filled in this particular model. Actually, only 18 of them are not filled in. You know what? The next thing I want to do right now is give it some life. So in my issue count here, I'm going to add conditional formatting on the background. And I do this all the time. So your lowest value, you select a blue and then a darker blue for the maximum value. And this very simple thing is just going to make this a lot more legible. Now, of course, you could start kind of messing around with this data and start sorting it. So we see, for example, there was a lot of issues created on this date. And if I wanted, I could also sort this by the highest amount of issues created on a date. And I can sort this alphabetically. Perhaps I don't even care about this, right? So you can change this matrix however you'd like. But this is going to be kind of the foundation, the main place where we select data. And later on, we're going to go into a more advanced way of playing with this. So we got a little matrix here. Let's do a couple things, actually. We're going to go format it and give it a title. So right now there is a title, but it's empty. So we're just going to call this issues. All of a sudden, we see the issues title there. It's a little bit clearer. Okay, so we got an issue. Let's create a slicer or a selector so we can decide, how we can select per status, for example. So the slicer button is right next to our matrix and table. It's right there. And what I can do is I can simply drag in the Revizto issue status in the field, and all of a sudden we have all of these issues. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you're probably going to have, 5 types of issues depending on what you've decided. This is just the type of data that they have. So if I select only approved issues, we're going to see there's 2 approved issues on level 2. Let's do the same thing, but with a pie chart or a donut chart. So I'm just going to bring in a donut chart in here, and I'm going to drag the status as the legend, and I'm going to bring in the issue ID as the values. And all of a sudden, we're seeing the same data as this. Is just that it's going to be in a graphical manner. So we see that the most issues that we have are open. And we can play with this if we go formatting. For example, we could decide to not have a legend. We could decide that the detail labels should show everything, right? So what the status is, how many of them, and what percentage. Now notice it says 72.0. I don't need that, right? So I don't need that value decimal space. I'm just going to put that to 0. Now it just says 72. All right, if we take a step back and look at where we were and where we want to go, we see that there's these graphs that are analyzing how many issues per assignee. Maybe one of the most important is the issues per rooms and the issues per level. So let's create these right now. I'm going to click on my graph here, and it's going to be the same concept. I'm just always counting the same thing. I'm counting issue IDs. So that's going to be my x-axis. And then we're going to want to have the y-axis as the levels. And I'm going to bring the levels as a legend too, so that's going to give it some color so that we can start playing with that. Now, just a couple of things. We may want to change the title. And just some little refinement, right? It says count of issues. So if I double click in here, I can just say issues. It's pretty clear that it's a count of the issues. Now let's make another slicer. We're going to do a slicer per level. So I'm just going to drag this in here and drag in my Revizto levels into this slicer. And I don't really want this big list, right? The lists are great when you've got too many things, like this is way too many statuses. But in this case, we may want to save some space. So in the formatting of the visual, instead of a vertical list, I'm going to have a dropdown. Now you can look at what a tile looks like, right? If you have a lot of data, it's not going to make sense. But if you have 3 to 5 options, it may make sense for you. So I'm going to look at the dropdown, and then I can make this much smaller and look at, I can select per level the issues that I want to have in here. Okay, so let's give this a title, levels, and now we can make this smaller and just place it where it makes more sense. And we're going to do the same thing with the status here, status, and I'm going to make this also be a drop down so we can save a lot of space. Okay, so this should give you an idea of how we were able to create this page and how you can have all of these components. Actually, that reminds me, there's one last thing, which is a card. So let me create a little card here. It's going to be extremely simple. All I'm going to do is drag the number of issues or the issues IDs. And once again, the little refinement, instead of count of issue ID, I'm just going to double click in here and say issues. And then when I select a number of issues here or multiple issues, is going to tell me how many issues. I can even go and start color coding this. For example, I could say, if it's close to 0, it should be green. If it goes above 20 or above 50, it should start getting red. So that way you can have just a very quick summary of the kind of data that you have in here. This is where you would do it, by the way, in the conditional formatting, the FX. So you could say, for example, if the number is 0, actually, let's add a middle color. I'm going to say if it's close to 10, that's the middle. And if it's above 50, it should be red or, perhaps a dark pink kind of color. So it'll be negative without being too crazy. So we're starting to see, okay, 106 issues. That's kind of a lot. We want to get that more into the green zone. All right, next video, we're going to look how to make a field parameter that's going to allow a lot of flexibility in your matrix, and we're going to wrap this up.